Welcome to Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming. I'm Mike Trabulsie, and this is rock's most underrated drummers. In this first segment of rock's most underrated drummers, we're going to take a look at the drummer who I consider to be rock's number one underrated drummer, 1960 to 1980. To begin with, there are some names we're not going to consider. John Bonham, Neil Peart, Carl Palmer, Billy Bruford, Terry Bozzio, Keith Moon, and there are probably a few others that could be on that list. We're not going to consider those drummers because they're not underrated. They have received high praise and many accolades over the years. All, of course, well-deserved. My opinion is subjective. You may have a different opinion, and that's okay. I'm going to state my case, make what I think you will find to be a compelling argument for this drummer. You can agree or disagree. I'm going to use 4 areas of analysis to base my opinion. However, I'm not going to consider technique. I don't feel that technique alone, for example, speed or double bass drum ability, makes a great drummer. Now, when I say technique, I'm talking about the mechanical elements of technique, such as speed, bass drum ability, coordination, etc. John Bonham, for example, and Neil Peart, considered 2 of the greatest drummers of all time. John Bonham, generally speaking, he didn't play a lot of fast stuff. It wasn't speed that made him great. And Bonham didn't even play double bass drums. And Neil Peart, yes, he played double bass drums, but I wouldn't say his drumming was heavy on the bottom. You know, he used the double bass drums primarily in fills. So we're going to eliminate technique from my analysis. Again, I'm going to use 4 areas of analysis. The first one is what I call playing for the music. Playing for the music is the absolute number one thing that any drummer can do. It's the most important thing above technique, above anything. It's the number one thing that other instrumentalists generally look for in a drummer. How well do you play the music? And playing for the music speaks to many levels of drumming artistry. The second area of analysis that I'm going to use is musicality. You can approach drumming from a purely technical perspective. You develop your ability, you learn your rudiments, you develop your licks, and then when it comes time to play music, you apply all of that to whatever music you're playing. That in and of itself is not musicality. Musicality is something very different. Musicality comes from a place where you put away the technique and the rudiments and the licks and the patterns, and you live and breathe the music. You play from the heart. Those things that I mentioned, technique, rudiments, licks, patterns, yes, you want to learn those elements. You want to learn to speak the language of drumming. But when it comes time to play music, you must put all of that aside and approach music from a different place. Musicality calls on you to play what supports, enhances, and complements the music. The third area of analysis that I'm going to use is what I call musical maturity. As an analogy, human beings, from the time they're born to the time they're elderly, along the path of life, they mature. Musicians do the same thing. And I call that musical maturity. And musical maturity calls on you primarily to exercise self-control. It takes an enormous amount of self-control to rein in your technique. Musical maturity calls on you to refrain from playing things that you absolutely can play, but absolutely should not play unless the music calls for it. The final category of analysis that I'm going to use in determining my choice for rock's #1 underrated drummer, 1960 to 1980, is melodic drumming. Melodic drumming seems to me to be a mystery to many drummers. The drums, for example, are not a melodic instrument like a piano or an electric guitar or a bass guitar or a horn, a saxophone. But you can approach drumming in a melodic-like fashion. The piano, for example, has notes of an exacting pitch. And those notes are organized in a way that creates melody when you're playing melody. The drums are different. Now, I've heard some drummers talk about tuning their drums to specific intervals. An interval being the distance between two notes or two pitches, say on a piano or a guitar. But tuning your drums to specific intervals is not a school of thought in tuning that I adhere to. And I'm not talking about creating specific pitches and using those to create melody. That's not what I'm talking about. But you can play the drums. For example, when creating fills, you can play fills to create a more musical, melodic-like fill by combining rhythm and the tonal colors of the drum set in a melodic-like manner. What you want to do is think like a piano player or a guitar player in terms of melody, but play like a drummer. I can tell you, just as an aside, from many years of playing and studying piano, that your drumming becomes much more musical and melodic without even thinking about it when you play a melodic or harmonic instrument. And so that's my pitch for every drummer, to play a second instrument. I want to add one other thing. Rhythm is rhythm. Melody is melody. But in melodic drumming, what you really want to do is combine rhythm and melody together to create a melodic-like fill, or rhythm. So those are my 4 areas of analysis with which I've used to make a determination as to who I think is rock's #1 underrated drummer, 1960 to 1980. And who do I think that is? It's the great, musically mature, highly musical and artistic drummer from the band Black Sabbath. And that is, of course, the great Billy Ward. The 3 albums I used for my analysis of Billy Ward's drumming were Paranoid, released in 1970, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, released in 1973, and Sabotage, released in 1975. If you listen to Billy Ward's performances on those 3 albums, you will hear an amazing display, a selfless display of playing for the music, musicality, musical maturity, and melodic drumming. I don't think there was a song on those 3 albums that Billy Ward played that he was thinking about this rudiment or that rudiment or this lick or that lick or this pattern or that pattern. Yes, he created artistic musical performances, but he played for the music. And he approached those performances with such great levels of musicality, musical maturity, and melodic drumming. Really a joy to listen to. I believe he was playing from somewhere deep inside. He was playing music from the heart. His performances supported, complemented, enhanced, and helped make great the songs on those albums. So to summarize, playing for the music, musicality, musical maturity, and melodic drumming. When you look at Billy Ward's performances on Paranoid, Sabbath, Bloody Sabbath, and Sabotage, and you weigh those brilliant performances against those 4 criteria, I think you will agree that Billy Ward is rock's #1 underrated drummer, 1960 to 1980, and his name deserves to be mentioned with the greats who were highly recognized during the golden age of rock. I want to thank you for tuning in, and please join me again at Mike Trabulsie's Institute for the Artistry of Drumming. And remember, drumming without artistry is just drumming.